Hey, another warm day here in Texas. We're starting to wonder what happened to winter. It was 79 where I'm at, and some parts of the state made it up to 88 degrees today. And that's a quick look at what's been going on out there in the past hour. You can see a stratocumulus layer just kind of hanging around out there as we're under a very strong warm air advection pattern. This is the temperature anomaly map, and you've probably gotten kind of familiar with this watching the webcast over the past few days. And the big thing that you've noticed is the warm air advection has really cranked up the heat quite a bit. And you can see it got started over Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma over the weekend, and it gradually just crept northward, and now we've got it spreading into the Midwest, up to the Great Lakes region, and these areas are running about 15 to 25 degrees above normal. And it's all the way up to Quebec. Very large low-pressure area there, and that's out ahead of a cold front that's in this area. Just a very deep warm air advection pattern all the way up to the northeast and the Quebec and Ontario area. Here's a look at exactly what kind of values we had today. These are the high temperatures today, and the red indicates the all-time record for this date. So in other words, on January 11th, this year set the highest temperature for the stations in red here. Oklahoma was 79 degrees, and that was about 5 degrees above the previous record. And yeah, some of these records were shattered. St. Louis also several degrees above the previous record. But this gives you a very good idea where the front is, because just up to the north in the Dakotas, single digits and even below zero. Very hard to believe, but yeah, it's up there. So the front is pretty much in this area. Go north of there, no longer have 70s, it drops off into the 20s and 30s. And it does get kind of difficult to find the cold front. I was looking at a couple products earlier, and I couldn't really pin it down very well across this region. I can see we do have 97 way down here. So that's definitely the tropical air mass. And this here is definitely the cold air mass, 17 there at Pendleton. So that front is somewhere along that line. And we'll try to figure that out with the charts this evening. And that brings us to the 500 millibar flow. And before I get too far along, let me check the audio, and chat is always good for that. There's usually a panic if the chat is not running, if the microphone is off or something. Sometimes the mixing board kind of flakes out. Alexi in Central Texas says 77 degrees. Yeah, hello there. And hi to Mark and Andrew and Tree, Kevin, Ron, Sarah there, and Sue in Indiana. Gust to 31 degrees and squall line there. And Fred there wants some warm air advection, says minus 14 in Grand Forks. Fred, are you in Grand Forks? I meant to copy that down yesterday, and I don't think I did, so let me put that in my notes here. Grand Forks, yeah, that's way up north. That's close to Winnipeg there. And, yeah, the high up in that region. Wow, look at that, minus 5. That is quite a change from conditions right down there, like a day's drive. Get into the 70s right there in Missouri. And I do remember when I was going through the forecast school there at Chanute, it was kind of great to look at the wintertime and see the much higher temperatures. Like December, we would get 60s and a few 70s in Oklahoma that time of year, and we would just kind of like salivate looking at that warm air just off to the south, but it never made it up to Illinois where we were at. Okay, let's see. Anything else in chat? Not really. Sound 5x5. All right. Okay, this kind of explains the pattern. We've got kind of a split flow pattern going on. The big thing is that the northwesterly flow we had across the western U.S., that's subsided a little bit, and we've got basically this river coming across the Arctic, affecting Fred there, and then we've got the southern stream coming out of the Pacific. This thing has been cranking up as we've broken down the block, and that's gotten California and Nevada and Oregon pretty active. So there it is. You can see we've got zonal flow there. Jet is located roughly from the central San Joaquin Valley up to about Cheyenne, and then it goes up to about, looks like about Wisconsin here. So that's going to represent where the front is. The front is going to be just to the south of that, and we know that we have a trough out in the west coast and maybe a flat ridge out in this area, and that's going to be roughly where we're going to find the front, somewhere south of that. So we should find it somewhere between central Nevada and maybe Arizona somewhere. Now, one quick way we can look at to find the fronts is, of course, on the soundings. What I'll do is I'll pull up Tucson here in southern Arizona and see what that shows. And this is showing us a high tropopause up there at about, looks like about 35,000. Very warm column all the way from the ground upwards. We've got 70 degrees there at the surface and just warm all the way up, and fairly dry westerly flow there at Tucson. If we go a little bit further north, let's try Las Vegas. I would say that's probably similar. Looks kind of warm, and we pick up a subsidence inversion here. So that's probably been some convergence aloft, maybe working on the air mass and forcing some downward motion there. Also, tropopause really high up there too. And if we go a little further north up to Elko, looks like our column cools off. The tropopause is a lot lower, down to 30,000, and the surface temperature starts out there at about 32, 35 Fahrenheit, and pretty cold column all the way up. So it looks like our transition zone is somewhere in Nevada. Now, one thing we can do to kind of cheat is to look at the WPC Weather Prediction Center. They've got an official forecast there, and you can always go by that. So this is weather forecast for 11th. That looks like a general day one outlook. Fronts, we can pull that up here. WPC fronts issued at 1Z. That's like 5 minutes ago. Valid for 0Z. Okay. So this would be fairly current, and they've got this one little front coming through Southern California, and they couldn't really resolve the front through here very well, although that overview did kind of paint it through this area here. Okay, let's see what we've got on the surface analysis. Start out with the western U.S. And it looks fairly mild, and we've got southwesterly flow there at Las Vegas, and that's what we would see in a warm type of pattern. So I'm thinking we're probably looking at maybe a front kind of like that, and maybe coming back through California. So north of that, westerly winds there at Reno, and some snow in the higher elevations here. Okay, so that looks pretty much where our front is. Texas, we're under the warm air advection pattern, and you can see the trajectories are coming out of the western Gulf. So definitely some very warm air, 70s, and dew points. Look at that, 68 there, and even 73 here at Veracruz. So that moisture is going to basically start making its way northward, especially as we get cyclogenesis up here with the approach of a storm system this weekend. That's kind of like a big vacuum cleaner. It'll bring that tropical air mass northward. Leading edge of the cold air, looks like that runs from about Chicago down to about Chanute, Kansas, up to about Gage, Oklahoma. Looks like it is pretty shallow. Doesn't go very far west, maybe to Denver, but Pueblo and Colorado Springs looking pretty warm there under the influence of this westerly flow here. So just how shallow is it? That's where we can use the soundings once again. And I'll pull up the Topeka sounding. That's kind of like right in the middle of the leading edge of that cold air. And that only tops out at about maybe 4,000 feet above the ground. You can see a very shallow area of northerly wind. And classic frontal inversion right here. Both lines moving to the right as you go up. Probably a similar pattern there at Omaha. Very sharp frontal inversion, but very shallow. And that contrasts quite a bit from what we had about a week ago. You remember that cold air mass that was coming south into the central U.S.? We were looking at soundings more like, well, maybe not like that. Kind of like this. If you take the moisture and temperature, they were very deep and they were topping out at close to 15 to 20,000 feet. And that's one reason a lot of that air mass made it into the western U.S. It was so deep, it was able to come across the mountain passes and make its way into the Great Basin region and the valleys there in the Intermountain region. But nothing like that today, and that's keeping the bulk of the cold air in the eastern and central plains and kind of off the high plains here. Elsewhere around the country, looks pretty mild there in the southeast U.S., a lot of 60s, kind of a nice day down there. And, of course, the northeast U.S. enjoying some warm air with 40s and 50s in that region. Leading edge of that front from basically about just north of Detroit to Chicago. Okay, let's see what we should look at next. I guess we can probably start on our... Oh yeah, let's check out the frontal analysis real quick. We'll just kind of harden things in. So yeah, that's the front, just kind of like the way we had it on the surface analysis. Then it becomes a little bit more vague. I think we went with kind of a placement like that. I'm not sure why our thicknesses are so much lower in Arizona. Probably a little bit of residual cold air aloft maybe in that area. But the core of the polar air in the northwest right there over Washington, and then the other part of it up here over Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And it's going to be very difficult to bring that southward with this very strong zonal flow. The zonal flow itself is kind of like a block, and anything that sinks southward, it gets swept up into that zonal flow and affects mostly the northeastern U.S. And that's the reason it's taken so long for that front to make its way southward down the plains. So I think we're about ready to launch into the GFS forecast, and we'll see what kind of changes are coming up for this week. And my phone has been going off. Let me make sure I don't have any emergencies here. Let me send a quick text here. Just usual family stuff here. Okay. So, a little bit of chat in here on the YouTube text. Let me check that real quick. A little discussion about freezing rain, and Eduardo says, I like your forecast. Like to watch your forecast map. Okay, very good. The vorticity analysis you're asking about, I'm not really sure what you're referring to. Maybe The only vorticity analysis I have is this one here. The red and blue, those are vorticity contours, and that's going to be from this Meteostar site here, wxweb.meteostar.com. And that's probably the best vorticity, one of the best vorticity sites on the internet right there. So here comes our front coming south, and let's see what's going to happen for our webcast tomorrow. For Thursday, we're going to see the front sink down into the I-30 area and creeping up there on Dallas and Amarillo. And it's driven by this high pressure area, 1040 millibar high here, in the core of the polar air over the Great Lakes. So it's not very far west like we've had previously last week. So this is going to impact mostly the northeastern U.S. But we will get a little bit of wraparound coming back here through this easterly gradient here. And things are getting busy out in the Pacific. Here comes another chunk of energy through Southern California. Maybe we could place a surface system kind of like that. And that'll be approaching Texas over the weekend. So for Friday night, this is how it's going to be looking. Looks like the high pressure area kind of builds in. I'm not sure if we're getting the cold air here. Like this part of the air mass, like right here. This is what I'm wondering is where this air is coming from. I think it's probably still from the Gulf, and one way we can check that out is to look at the dew points. Okay, so this is no, that's the wrong one. Back that up here. Okay, there we go. This is for the same time as that previous chart, and we can see dew points are very high south of Dallas and south of basically in the Shreveport area, Monroe. All this is very moist, so this is all a tropical air mass. Looks like the leading edge of the cold air is actually way back here, around Little Rock and Memphis. So we're going to place the front something like this. So we've got just enough overrunning in Missouri for a little bit of freezing rain here. As this comes into the time frame for the NAM, I would actually be using the NAM to forecast that rather than the GFS. And then we see the Pacific system coming through Arizona here. And there's the cold core in Southern California. So probably a chance for showers there in the Los Angeles area for Friday. Should be some interesting weather there. Then Saturday's forecast. Looks like that front doesn't make much progress southward towards Dallas, or in fact, it looks like we get a very strong southerly flow off the Gulf, and I think that's helping to keep the front locked up here along the Red River. Pacific system making its way through the southern Rockies. Probably something like that. Cold core coming into the northern Gulf of California area here. And what's important about this is the jet stream. Let me draw the surface fronts. They're going to be looking kind of like this. Cold core located right in here. And the jet stream is going to kind of follow these thickness contours. So it's going to look kind of like this. That makes sense because the upper level trough is right there and the upper level ridge is right here. Upper level ridge here is mostly being caused by that strong warm air advection. Strong warm air advection causing all this precip here. And then between this ridge and this trough here, we expect to find the surface low along the jet stream in between. So everything matches up here. We have vertical consistency here. So this is our main baroclinic system coming through El Paso on Saturday. And then Sunday, that's going to be the day where Texas is dealing with some weather. This is going to be our webcast on Saturday or Sunday. It's like our frontal system moves into Texas here, and it lifts actually up through Oklahoma and Kansas. Cold pool is kind of in this area, causing some very strong showers and snow showers in the Albuquerque area, Santa Fe. Very strong warm air advection come in over here around north of the front. A couple conveyor belts feeding in the backside, and that's causing this heavy snow here in the Lamar and Goodland area of Kansas. So probably a bit of a snowstorm up there over the weekend. Freezing rain from Omaha to Des Moines here, and things are staying pretty much liquid in Texas. So very strong impact from warm air advection with this system. Then for Monday, it sneaks northward, and we get the backside of the front coming into Texas, and a bit of a squall line along that. And for Indiana there, strong warm air advection affecting there, so probably some showery weather, kind of mild. Then for Tuesday, there goes that old system, and then we get a little bit of development along the tail end here in Texas. But cold air advection is starting to work in the backside, and that should start clearing things out. There's all this high pressure here. So by Wednesday, that's clearing things out. Things are kind of mild, 552 decameter, 546. That's going to spell probably 50s and 60s for highs. Looks like a very zonal pattern, because it looks like our lee side low is back. You can see that there over the Rockies. And pressure falls here in Alberta. So maybe lee side low all the way through here. And looks like another system coming into the Pacific coast here. Again, this is on Wednesday. Then for Thursday, our next Pacific system makes it into Nevada and California there. So front is probably looking something like that, and that's going to be coming for Texas. Lee side trough here. And now it's crossing the Rockies for next weekend. And then it slings this next big system at us for Saturday, a week from now. There it is right there. So if I paint out the fronts, they're probably going to look kind of like that. The main baroclinicity area right down here to the south, so we're getting the heavier precipitation in the Tucson to El Paso area here. And there's probably going to be a lot of changes between now and then. This is 260 hours out. We can see what the Canadian model is doing on this. Let's check out the Canadian model forecast. Well, it's got it coming at Las Vegas, and that's the last frame I have right here. So, but it does look pretty similar to the GFS at that point right there. And this looks like a fairly deep system. You can see the core 540 through Texas here. Looks like a little bit of a negative tilt trough. See, there's the trough right there. That's what I mean by negative tilt there. So probably a pretty deep system. And then that'll come out into the eastern U.S. on the 24th there. And that's probably about as far as I want to get with that. And I think that's about all I got here. So, yeah, I can see a 546 decameter celebration there in chat. And I guess we'll have a lot to look at. And as far as ice and winter, what model do you trust, GFS and AM? I would go with NAM once it's within 24 to 48 hours, or even 72 hours there. And of course, you can use the Canadian model too. That has been proven to be pretty accurate over the past few weeks. Anyway, that's about all I got here. I appreciate you watching, and hope we'll see you tomorrow at the usual time. Have a good night.